It was just after 4:30 in the morning when the tracking app on Sade Robinson's phone suddenly went dark. Earlier that night, she had left work, excited about her first date with a man she'd recently met. By sunrise, her car was in flames, and along the shores of Lake Michigan, something unimaginable was waiting to be discovered. Sade Robinson was born in 2004 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She is the daughter of Sheena Scarborough and Carlos Robinson. Her life changed early on, when she was just a year old. Her parents separated. Sade then moved with her mother to Milwaukee, settling into her grandparents' home. This city would become the backdrop of her formative years, and the place where her vibrant personality began to bloom. From the start, Sade stood out. She was curious, energetic, and always eager to learn about the world around her. She approached every activity, from soccer to Girl Scouts, with great enthusiasm. These early experiences not only allowed her to shine, but also helped shape her natural skills in leadership, teamwork, and discipline. Though Sade's father lived in Florida, she maintained a close bond with him. Frequent visits between states became a routine part of her life, and through them, she developed a rare sense of independence and responsibility at a young age. As she grew older, Sade's passions began to take clearer form. She was drawn to the arts, especially rap music and dance, where she could express herself freely. But her dreams weren't limited to the creative world. She also felt a deep desire to serve her country and envisioned herself someday joining the armed forces. Her academic record was equally impressive. Sade was known as a standout student, always focused and determined. Yet, even with her achievements, she wasn't immune to challenges. During 7th grade, she encountered difficulties at school. As a result, she made the brave decision to relocate to Florida and live with her father, seeking a fresh start. Once again, Sade showed resilience in her new environment. She continued to excel, both socially and academically. Teachers and peers alike admired her focus, her ambition, and her quiet confidence, one that was rooted in strength rather than pride. In 2019, after spending several years in Florida, she returned to Milwaukee to live with her mother. When her final year of high school arrived in 2021, Sade poured herself into her studies, managing to graduate an entire semester early, yet another example of her unwavering determination. By 2024, at just 19 years old, Sade Robinson embodied a rare blend of discipline, ambition, and independence. She was pursuing a degree in art at Milwaukee Area Technical College, balancing her education with 2 full-time jobs. But her ambitions didn't stop there. She had already set her sights on a future in criminal law. Through sheer effort and careful, Sade was able to accomplish a major milestone. She bought her own car. It was more than just a vehicle. It represented her growing independence. Not long after, she moved out of her mother's home and rented her very own apartment. She balanced 2 demanding jobs to support herself. One of them was at Pizza Shuttle, where her work ethic, discipline, and initiative didn't go unnoticed. She quickly rose through the ranks and was promoted to manager. Her second job was at the prestigious Wisconsin Country Club, where she also helped her younger sister secure a position, making sure her sibling had access to the same opportunities that had shaped her own path. At that moment, her future looked incredibly bright. She had clear goals, the discipline to chase them, and the kind of maturity most people twice her age hadn't yet reached. Yet, behind all of that strength and focus, Sade still carried the hopes of any young woman her age. She dreamed of love, companionship, and a meaningful connection. What she never expected was that this search would lead her into the most dangerous moment of her life. April 1st, 2024 began like any other day for Sade. She started her morning shift at Pizza Shuttle, as she often did, took a few moments before work to catch up with her mother over FaceTime. Everything about the day seemed routine until the end of her shift. Sade was excited because she had a date planned that evening with a man she had recently met through a dating app. She left work to meet him. That would be the last time anyone in her group would see or hear from her. The following day, April 2nd, Said didn't show up for her shift. She hadn't called in sick or left a message, which was completely out of character. Concern quickly spread among her co-workers. They began texting and calling her, hoping for an explanation, but there was no reply. Her family and close friends also began to worry. None of them had heard from her since the day before. As hours passed without a word, worry turned into panic. Those closest to her knew something was wrong. This was a chilling and inexplicable silence. As night fell and still no answers emerged, one of Said's friends made the police and report her missing. Before doing so, she checked Said's most recent social media activity and found something crucial: a Snapchat post of Saad. The timestamp was around 9 p.m. on the night of April 1st. That would be the final digital trace Saad left behind. On April 3rd, with no updates and mounting concern, police officers went to Saad's apartment. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer and no sounds from within. Unbeknownst to them, authorities elsewhere in the city had already made a horrifying discovery. At around 7:30 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, the Milwaukee Fire Department received a report from local residents about a car on fire. When emergency crews arrived, they found thick smoke and flames engulfing a 2020 Honda Civic. The vehicle had been abandoned and was burning rapidly. Firefighters managed to contain the blaze. No one was inside the car, but the contents of the trunk raised immediate concern. A black coat, a pair of ripped jeans, and other women's clothing, charred but still identifiable. A cell phone, partially damaged by heat, was also recovered. The authorities now had physical evidence, but they still needed to know who the car belonged to. That answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Later that same day, Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputies were called to a different location. A man waiting for a friend had been walking along the edge of a park's beach when he stumbled upon something horrifying: a human leg lying near the shoreline. Forensic teams were called in, and after careful analysis, they determined the leg belonged to an African-American female. The remains were dismembered, but the condition of the limbs suggested the crime had occurred recently. As the investigation into Said's disappearance continued, one of the officers who had earlier visited her apartment learned of the discovery of the human remains. The physical description of the remains closely matched the details provided in the missing persons report for Said. Then, a second chilling confirmation arrived. The Honda Civic found burning that morning was registered to Said Robinson. With the pieces beginning to fall into place, detectives returned to her apartment. They spoke with the building's maintenance worker, who revealed that he had seen Said on the morning of April 1st. She seemed excited and said she was looking forward to a date after her shift. Investigators pulled the building's surveillance footage, which showed Said leaving her apartment at 9 p.m. On April 1st, she never returned. That footage, combined with the evidence from the car and the park, created an urgent new direction for the case. Authorities subpoenaed her phone records from her mobile carrier and traced her last text message to a number with a 262 area code. They didn't yet know who the number belonged to, but the content of the exchange made it clear it was the man she had planned to meet that night. Using that lead, police began cross-referencing phone data with surveillance footage. It soon emerged that Said and her date had met at a local venue called the Twisted Fisherman. Footage from the bar and witness statements from staff confirmed their presence there that evening. Another key piece of evidence came from the same friend who had filed the missing persons report. She revealed that she had access to Said's location through an app called Life 360, commonly used to track friends and family in real time. According to the app's log, the last known location for Said Robinson was Warnemont Park at 4:30 a.m. on April 2nd. A clearer timeline began to take shape. Investigators learned that she was originally scheduled to meet her date at 5 p.m. on April 1st at a place called Brad House. However, at the last minute, the man changed the location to a different venue, Twisted Fisherman, a bar where he had previously worked. He claimed he needed to stop by to pick up some paperwork. Said had no objection. At 5:20 p.m., she arrived at Twisted Fisherman. He was already there, waiting at the bar. The two sat side by side, ordered drinks and food, and chatted casually as the evening unfolded. Just over an hour later, they left the bar together, got into Said's car, and drove to a second location, Duke's, another bar. They spent roughly 3 hours at Duke's before heading to a residential neighborhood in southwestern Milwaukee, where they remained for several more hours. At some point in the early morning hours of April 2nd, Said's phone showed movement again, this time heading toward Warnemont Park. At 4:35, her Life 360 tracking app went silent. The battery had died. That was the last signal the phone would ever send. All signs pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Said Robinson had been murdered, and the person she had trusted enough to meet that night was now the prime suspect. Thanks to swift and coordinated work by law enforcement, the investigation progressed rapidly. Authorities had already zeroed in on one individual. Though his name was still unknown to the public, police knew he was the last person to see Said alive. The evidence they had gathered was enough to obtain both an arrest warrant and a search warrant for the residence traced from Said's phone activity. On April 4th at 1 p.m., officers moved in. They arrived at the suspect's home and took him into custody. His identity was finally confirmed. Maxwell Anderson, a 33-year-old man and the son of a well-known businessman in the region. Following his arrest, disturbing details about his background began to emerge. Throughout his life, Anderson had exhibited a pattern of problematic behavior. His own father had once tried to help him by giving him a position in the family business, but eventually fired him, stating that he was unfit for the job. Anderson was also a U.S. Navy veteran, but in recent years he had drifted from one job to the next, working primarily as a bartender in various establishments across Milwaukee. None of the positions lasted long. Between 2014 and 2019, he had multiple arrests on record, mostly for minor offenses such as public disorder and disturbances. Investigators worked to determine exactly how Said and Anderson first met. The initial assumption was that they had connected through a dating app, but another theory surfaced. They may have crossed paths in person at one of the bars where Anderson had worked, locations that Said and her friends were known to frequent. Following the arrest of Maxwell Anderson, detectives launched an extensive search of his residence. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. In one of the bedrooms, investigators discovered bloodstains on the bedding and on a wall leading down to the basement. That area, they soon realized, held even more disturbing clues. Inside the basement, they located multiple gas canisters and electric saws, items that raised immediate suspicion. The basement wasn't just a storage area, it appeared to have been prepared for something dark, something planned. The space, now a central point in the investigation, suggested that the crime against Said had been both premeditated and executed with chilling precision. The search for evidence did not stop there. On April 6th, just days after the house search, investigators returned to the area where Said's burned car had been discovered. Just 1 block away, they made another gruesome find: a human foot. The skin tone, size, and pink nail polish matched the severed leg recovered earlier. It belonged to Said. Meanwhile, detectives continued to comb through surveillance footage near the scene of the car fire. It was here they uncovered a critical piece of evidence. Security cameras captured Maxwell Anderson stepping out of Said's Honda Civic moments before setting it ablaze. Several bystanders in the area at the time later identified him as the man responsible. After starting the fire, Anderson was seen calmly walking away and boarding a nearby bus. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came from a key witness who knew Anderson personally. Alarmed by the news of Said's disappearance, this individual immediately went to the police. What they shared would reshape the entire investigation. A month before the crime, on March 5th, Anderson had allegedly described a plan to lure a woman to his basement, shoot her, dismember her body, and scatter the remains across the city. At the time, it seemed like a disturbing joke. In retrospect, it was a blueprint. The witness went on to describe a visit to Anderson's house just days before the murder. The basement, they said, was covered in plastic sheeting. There were 3 saws in plain view, a large tarp, and an area staged with intimate objects, further suggesting the calculated nature of the crime. Authorities feared there could be additional victims and began re-examining other reports linked to Anderson. In February 2024, a woman came forward claiming that after meeting Anderson at a bar, he invited her to his home. Once there, she began to feel unwell, leading her to suspect he had drugged her drink. She escaped before anything could happen. That escape may have saved her life. With mounting evidence, physical, digital, and testimonial, the prosecution built a powerful case. On April 12th, just 10 days after Sade Robinson vanished, Maxwell Anderson was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson to conceal a crime. Though Anderson continued to claim innocence, the case against him was overwhelming. On the morning of June 6, 2025, the courtroom in Milwaukee was silent and tense. Families, reporters, and community members filled every seat. After months of grief, outrage, and unanswered questions, the moment had finally arrived. The jury had reached its decision. It took less than a day of deliberation. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, their verdict was ready. Maxwell Anderson found guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, hiding a corpse, arson. It was official. The man who had lured 19-year-old Sade Robinson on a first date only to brutally kill and dismember her was now legally responsible for one of the most horrifying crimes Milwaukee had ever seen. The trial had laid bare every excruciating detail. Jurors were shown hundreds of surveillance images and forensic photographs. They listened to the testimony of dozens of witnesses. They saw snapshots of Sade in her final hours, alive, vulnerable, and unaware of the fate awaiting her. The prosecutor made the case clear. Sade was killed inside Anderson's home. He later dismembered her body, her remains, legs, arms, torso, even her right breast were scattered across counties. Some were found in the lake, others washed ashore, and in an attempt to erase it all, he set her car ablaze and walked away. Maxwell Anderson did not testify, and his defense team called no witnesses. His lawyer claimed the murder wasn't planned. However, the evidence suggested otherwise, revealing a sequence of events that started like any other night but culminated in horrifying violence. Sade Robinson was ambitious and full of potential. She was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, held 2 jobs, and was actively shaping her future. That future was taken from her. Now, justice has been served. Sentencing is scheduled for August 15th, but for her loved ones, the real sentence is something far greater: life without her. In some countries, strict control is a deeply ingrained part of the culture and customs. This can conflict with the values commonly held in Western societies. Even after moving to a new country, some people find it hard to adjust to greater personal freedoms. Holding too tightly to these traditional beliefs can sometimes lead to serious problems. Aziz Yazdanpana was born in Iran on May 29, 1955. Even as a young man, he was known for being strict and tough, yet those close to him also saw his softer side. His stern father instilled in him a deep respect for family, a sense of duty, and a strong sense of responsibility, values that Aziz strived to uphold. He was devoted to his family and longed to have one of his own. In his youth in Iran, he met the love of his life, Nasrin Rahmati, who was born on February 4, 1956. After dating for a while, they married, marking a new chapter in both their lives. Together, they decided to make a radical change and start anew in the United States of America. They successfully immigrated and settled in Grapevine, Texas, a small, pleasant town. Later, Nasrin's sister and her husband joined them in the U.S. There, the family continued to build their lives, raising 2 children. At the time of the events in question, Their daughter, Nona Yazdanpana, was 19, and their son, Ali Yazdanpana, was 14. Upon arriving in the US, Nasreen became a homemaker, dedicating her time to raising their children and managing the household. This was the traditional family structure common in Iran. Aziz was the breadwinner, focusing on a career in real estate. Initially, they had enough money, but with the addition of new family members, their circumstances changed, and they had to become more frugal. Although Aziz didn't outwardly appear strict and authoritarian, this became apparent to those who knew them well. This dynamic reflected the cultural influence of their upbringing. To the outside world, they seemed like a typical family pursuing the American dream. However, Nasreen couldn't help but notice the greater freedoms afforded to women in America compared to Iran. She desired more independence, but Aziz staunchly opposed it, clinging to traditional gender roles. Beneath the facade of an ideal family, problems began to mount. Soon, Aziz faced a series of setbacks. They had purchased a large family home, and as the children grew, their expenses increased. Furthermore, Aziz's ambitions exceeded their financial means, and he struggled to achieve the level of income he desired. Nasreen offered support, but Aziz grew increasingly discontented. A significant blow came in 1996 when Aziz was convicted of tax evasion and ordered to pay a $30,000 fine. He was also placed on probation for 3 years, further straining the family's already limited resources and threatening the loss of their home. Nasreen wanted to contribute to managing the budget and suggested solutions, such as downsizing to a more affordable house. However, Aziz refused to allow her to make important decisions, seemingly acting in opposition to her suggestions. He believed he could resolve their financial problems on his own and elevate their situation. Nasreen attempted to become more involved in the family's life, including financial matters, and suggested ways she could help, pointing to the common practice of American women earning incomes on par with their husbands. However, Aziz considered even the suggestion an insult. He insisted that his wife remain a housewife, responsible only for the children and household chores. This situation persisted for several years. By 1999, their financial situation had reached another low point, leading them to consider filing for bankruptcy. However, the case was quickly dismissed. As the children grew up, their needs increased, requiring new clothes and school supplies. Aziz began to accuse Nasreen and the children of overspending. Despite their modest lifestyle, his attempts to improve their financial situation continued to fail. The situation worsened in 2007 when Aziz lost his job, depriving the family of their only source of income. Despite everything, Aziz continued to insist that Nasreen not work. However, she could no longer remain idle. She had taken courses and obtained a cosmetology license and wanted to work in a beauty salon, perhaps even starting her own business. This would significantly contribute to the family's budget. Aziz ignored her pleas, clinging to his conservative beliefs. He had never adapted to the American way of life, where women could hold equal positions with men, and refused to consider deviating from his traditional views. Finally, when her husband lost his job and could not find another, Nasreen decided to take matters into her own hands. Disobeying her husband was out of character, but she saw no other way to save her family from financial ruin. She was completely disappointed in him and realized he had no chance of fitting into the American format. Ignoring his prohibitions, Nasreen found a job, managing to work at 2 beauty salons simultaneously. This initially allowed her to somewhat stabilize the situation, but Aziz was going through a terrible emotional period and made rash decisions. He felt he had lost his manhood, not only because he lost his job, but also because he could not support his family. He became jealous of Nasreen's success and, in an attempt to assert his dominance, declared he would refuse to work at all if she continued to work like a man. He repeatedly confessed to family friends that all this had severely damaged his self-esteem. The roles in the family had now completely reversed. Nasreen began working with enthusiasm, hoping her husband's resentment would soon pass and they could build a prosperous future together. But instead of actively seeking income, Aziz ignored the needs of his loved ones. He simply stopped showing any initiative and didn't even look for work. Aziz didn't give up easily, but his pride was deeply wounded by his wife's actions. According to a friend of Nasreen, the tension in the marriage had increased significantly. The owner of the beauty salon where Nasreen worked saw her hard work and the problems the family was struggling with. Even with the strained relationship with her husband, Nasreen still hoped they could save their marriage and overcome their financial difficulties. She often spoke of her dreams in which Aziz would find a job and stop being angry with her. However, friends and neighbors noticed that the atmosphere in the house was becoming increasingly tense. Aziz's attempt to teach her a lesson had backfired. To his surprise, his wife was able to bear the financial burden, providing for him and their 2 children. It was difficult, but she managed. Instead of being happy for her, he harbored resentment and anger, which manifested in cruel ways. She maintained stability for a while. However, once the children grew up, their needs increased again, and their daughter needed money for her education, putting a strain on their finances. Aziz continued to mock her. He was so determined to teach his wife a lesson that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions. Even the children began to get angry with him. Nona and Ali were old enough to see and understand what was happening. However, his strict control did not weaken, so they did not have much freedom. Conflicts in the family home became regular. If earlier, Aziz had provoked them by blaming everyone for their failures, now the others confronted him directly. After 24 years of marriage, Nasreen stopped trying to encourage Aziz. She finally realized that he was not going to participate in solving their problems, but would continue to make them worse. By April 2011, Nasreen had decided to separate from Aziz. She and her children left their spacious family home, choosing a more modest living arrangement to avoid complete financial ruin. They moved from a 2-story house of 280 square meters to a 3-room apartment, providing minimal amenities for their son and daughter. The priority was not comfort or size, but freedom from her husband, who was a burden, and increased tension within the family. They ended up about 3 kilometers from their old residence. Nasreen took out a mortgage on the apartment and planned to continue paying for it herself. Remarkably, even in this situation, she didn't want to cause a scene and simply moved quietly, without unnecessary conflict. Even the neighbors didn't immediately realize what had happened, as it was all done so calmly. They were more struck by the sudden silence, the absence of arguments in the house. Only then did some realize Nasreen and Aziz had separated. Only the closest neighbors knew the truth. Several months passed. Nasreen continued to work and felt a significant sense of relief after leaving her husband. The atmosphere in the family became much calmer and warmer. Despite financial constraints, the burden felt much lighter than when she was living with Aziz. Nasreen spent a lot of time with her family and friends. In her opinion, reconciliation with her husband was completely out of the question. From the outside, Aziz's condition seemed to have improved, but it was just an act. One Friday in March, they were seen together again. This happened a few months after the breakup. That day, Aziz and Nasreen participated in a joint garage sale, but they didn't seem as friendly and happy as before. Many noticed the tension, but Aziz avoided conflict. He tried to appear to be a good person, even attending his children's sports competition. However, Nasreen understood perfectly well that this was just a facade. She had already filed for divorce and was waiting for it to be finalized. Everyone thought that the separation was beneficial for Nasreen. Nasreen continued to work hard, and her daughter, Nona, contributed to the family income. Without her father's oppressive presence, Nona was able to help realize their dream of simplifying their life in the US. Just like her mother, the family began to cope much better. Nona earned her high school diploma and then went to college. With the improved atmosphere at home, she could focus on more than just solving problems. She began to pursue her own ambitions. She wanted to go to the University of California to study law. If she could become a lawyer and start a private practice, it could be the beginning of a better life for her. However, not everyone was so optimistic about the future. Close friends knew that Nona was actually going through a difficult time. Behind the facade of progress and apparent resilience, there was a deep inner struggle. Back in August 2011, she confessed to her best friends that she was dealing with some serious issues that were only getting worse. However, no one could get her to reveal any details. For Aziz, the situation continued to deteriorate. He tried in every way to demonstrate that he was ready to continue the relationship, but Nasreen and the children were indifferent. During their separation, Nasreen only became more convinced that she was moving in the right direction and that life would be easier, more comfortable, alone. All this fueled Aziz's anger. He was still trying to repair the relationship, but deep down, he had long understood that it was impossible. Each meeting with Nasreen, where she shared her successes, only increased his resentment. All this anger accumulated, and it was bound to explode eventually. After a year of shocks, separations, and conflicts, on December 25, 2011, Nasreen decided to throw a festive Christmas party at her house, intended to gather all family members and mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Everyone who knew Nasreen and the children well was invited, except for Aziz. No one wanted him to come and ruin the mood. As he usually did, Nasreen wanted to celebrate with her children, so she invited her sister, Zohra Rahmati, 58, her husband, Mohammad Hossein Zari, 59, and their daughter, Sahra Zari, 22. Unfortunately, Aziz learned about the planned Christmas party. He was furious that he wasn't invited. Despite all the pain and insults he had inflicted on his family, he believed he had a right to attend the event, and he harbored malicious intentions. At the very beginning of the holiday, around 11 a.m., there was a knock at Nasreen's door. When she opened it, she saw a man dressed as Santa Claus. Nasreen immediately recognized him as Aziz. Obviously, no one had invited him. He could ruin the family holiday, and she desperately wanted to prevent that. Aziz behaved very friendly, trying to convince her that he only wanted to surprise the children. After a short discussion, Nasreen reluctantly agreed to let him in. As soon as Aziz entered, the atmosphere became tense. Everyone, even Sarah, felt the unease. No one wanted him there. They hoped he would leave soon after offering his greetings. Sarah was texting her friends. Around 11 a.m., she wrote that Uncle Aziz showed up at a party he wasn't invited to, dressed as Santa Claus, to ruin everything. She sarcastically added that Aziz now wanted to win the Father of the Year award. The text was full of biting remarks, as she knew how much the man had damaged the lives of her aunt and aunt's children. At 11:15, Sahra sent another message. According to her, Aziz had already started to provoke another argument. Then, the girl fell silent forever. At 11:34, a call came into the 911 emergency service. The operator could barely hear a whisper on the other end of the line. The caller was begging for rescue. After a few short phrases, the call was disconnected. No information was provided, but it was clear that something terrible had happened. The operator quickly identified the location from which the call was made, and a police patrol was dispatched to the address to investigate. The officers arrived within 3 minutes, but no one answered the door. Given the alarming circumstances of the call, they decided to force entry. Inside, the officers found a horrifying scene: a festive table laden with food and drink, unopened gifts, and the bodies of 7 people. None had survived. The victims were identified as 55-year-old Nasreen, 56-year-old Aziz, their children, 19-year-old Nona, and 14-year-old Ali. Nasreen's sister, 58-year-old Zohra, her husband, 59-year-old Muhammad, and their daughter, 22-year-old Sarah. The entire family, along with their guests, had been shot. The television was on, and one of the victims was still dressed in pajamas. The children and teenagers had been shot in the head. Muhammad had sustained the most gunshot wounds, including shots to the head, chest, and stomach, suggesting he had tried to escape. Nasreen and Aziz were both shot in the head. The victims' autopsies revealed that everyone except Muhammad had been shot with the same 9 9mm weapon. Muhammad was found with a 9mm firearm in his hand. A second man, dressed as Santa Claus, Aziz, was also found with a firearm in hand. It remained unclear whether he was the attacker or if he had been trying to defend himself. Aziz and Muhammad were initially considered suspects. To clarify the situation, detectives began tracing the firearms. All evidence was collected and sent for ballistic analysis. The public was shocked by the murders and demanded quick answers from the police. Detectives initially believed that the attacker was among the dead and no longer posed a threat. The first major breakthrough came the day after the tragedy, on December 26, 2011. The 9mm pistol was traced back to a 1996 purchase registered to Aziz. Ballistic analysis confirmed that it was used to kill 5 of the victims. Significant gunpowder residue was found on Aziz's hands, indicating he had fired the weapon extensively. Minimal gunpowder residue was found on Muhammad's hands, suggesting he had not fired a weapon actively. Experts suggested he may have only fired once. The investigation was further aided by interviews with neighbors and a review of surveillance footage in the area. The footage showed that after the man dressed as Santa Claus entered the house, no one left. It appeared that Aziz had tried to cover his tracks. After shooting his relatives, he attempted to frame Muhammad by placing the 9mm pistol in his hand after his death. The weapon had been carefully cleaned and all fingerprints removed. There wasn't even a trace of Muhammad's fingerprints on the gun, which was impossible. Aziz fired 2 shots from a .40 caliber pistol. The first struck Muhammad, and the second he directed into his own head. Long, standing animosity between the family members, coupled with the news that Aziz was unwelcome at the gathering, may have been the final catalyst for his actions. However, the fact that he deliberately came to the house armed suggests that he had planned the crime in advance. This wasn't an act of spontaneous aggression, but seemingly a premeditated, first-degree murder of his entire family. Aziz took great pains to establish a reliable alibi, a fact that initially confused the investigation. Yet, for reasons unknown, he changed his mind and chose to end his life alongside his loved ones. He likely realized the magnitude of his crime and felt he could not live with the consequences. In total, 7 people died in this bloody tragedy. The scale of the devastation shocked not only those familiar with the Aziz family, but the entire local community. Another important piece of evidence is mobile phone data of Sarah. Detectives became interested in messages she had sent to her friends. Only 20 minutes elapsed between the start of the attack and the deaths of 7 people. The exact trigger that prompted Aziz to commit such violence remained unclear. During the investigation, various theories emerged, ranging from the obvious anger Aziz felt towards his wife and family to his potential mental state. Many experts in the field of psychiatry weighed in on the issue. Aziz appeared to be a man sinking into a deep depression, feeling that he was losing control of his life. His wife had filed for divorce a few months before the massacre, and his house was in a deplorable state. He faced foreclosure and had not secured stable, full-time employment leading up to the crime. While law enforcement officers struggled to piece together the puzzle, they uncovered the struggles of 19-year-old Nona. She had begun dating a friend and classmate, a relationship her father disapproved of. A conservative man, deeply rooted in the traditions of his native country, Aziz exerted total control over the lives of all his family members, including his daughter, often to the detriment of her emotional well-being. Nona's friends reported that she often came to school in tears, complaining that her father wouldn't allow her to wear the clothes she liked and regularly confiscated and checked her mobile phone, scrutinizing every message. According to his religious and cultural views, she was not allowed to leave the house until a certain age. Even after Nona reached that age, Aziz forbade her from communicating with anyone, especially boys and men. Nona's disobedience only worsened Aziz's state of mind. When the family still lived together in their old house, he installed surveillance cameras throughout the property, both inside and out. This allowed him to monitor everyone's movements. creating a situation resembling a developing obsession. He jealously guarded her, even sealing the window in her room to prevent her from secretly running away to see her girlfriend. Aziz frantically tried to maintain control, a control he had long since lost. When the disobedience reached a breaking point, everyone abandoned him. The head of the broken family simply decided to kill everyone. Further details of Aziz's relationships were revealed. He had been quite close to his brother-in-law, Muhammad. For a long time, the men shared a warm relationship and even went on trips together. On one occasion, they cheated on their wives, renting hotel rooms and spending the night with escorts. After Nasreen filed for divorce, Aziz blamed everyone but himself, unable to accept his own imperfections. The killer became convinced that Muhammad had revealed his infidelity, poisoning Nasreen against him. From that moment on, the relationship between the men deteriorated significantly, and Aziz considered his brother-in-law a traitor. This explained why Aziz had decided to frame him by placing a weapon in the dead man's hand. Those who knew Nasreen well had heard much about her reasons for separating from Aziz. She cited his failures in upholding his cultural and religious obligations. Instead of providing for everyone, supporting his family, and creating a comfortable home, Aziz seemed to deliberately make their lives difficult, increasing the emotional distance between himself and his wife and children. He transformed their life and everyday existence into a nightmare, pushing them to the verge of complete ruin. Instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Aziz tried to blame everyone around him. As it turned out, Nasrin's close friends had heard many times that she was afraid of her husband. She had stated this several months before filing for divorce, and after she moved out, the situation only worsened. She tried to avoid contact with him and did not allow him into the house. She prevented him from communicating with the children. Considering him dangerous, she ignored suggestions to report him to the police, hoping he would calm down on his own and not wanting to cause him further trouble. Neighbors had heard that Aziz had been carrying a gun for a long time. He completely ignored the traditions and laws of the country he had moved to. He claimed that he had acquired a firearm to protect his daughter from the unwanted attention of American men. On December 28, 2011, the entire Grapevine, Texas community gathered to honor the victims. This shooting is the deadliest crime ever committed in the city. Nasreen and the children were especially mourned. She was remembered as a devoted mother, an altruistic, generous woman who tried to escape the clutches of a tyrant, but paid for it with her life. The Christmas Day massacre of 2011 left Grapevine, Texas, forever scarred, its festive spirit tainted by an unimaginable act of violence. The loss of Nasreen Rahmati, her children, Nona and Ali, and their relatives Zohre Rahmati, Muhammad Hossein Zari, and Sahra Zari shattered a close-knit community known as the Christmas capital of Texas. Vigils at Parr Park and memorials at Colleyville Heritage High School honored their memory. The tragedy underscored the devastating consequences of unaddressed marital strife, financial ruin, and rigid cultural beliefs clashing with personal freedoms. It serves as a somber reminder to foster understanding and support for those struggling to adapt to new societal norms, lest such pain and loss repeat in silence. Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced, albeit less severe than before. Her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding. Items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, Forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing. Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities, she desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. she made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19th, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton Police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. On a day in early 2021, San Diego police received an unusual call from a woman reporting that her stepfather was missing. At first, everyone thought it was an old man who got lost. But just a few days later, what they found in the backyard of that house revealed a controversial story: a wrapped and carefully hidden corpse. The adopted daughter, Jade, quickly became a murder suspect. And it all started with a gruesome secret buried in a computer, what pushed both fates to a dead end. Let's explore the whole story to get the answer. After the call, a patrol was sent to her home. Jade greeted the officers outside the home, acting polite and reserved. Inside, the house appeared spotless and orderly. But beneath this surface of normalcy lay a reality far darker than anyone could have expected. In truth, this story had begun long before the disappearance, and its ending would prove to be far more horrific than imagined. Jade Jenks, a California native, was raised primarily by her father, her sole guardian since childhood. He provided stability, care, and unwavering support. Her relationship with her mother was far more complicated. Due to addiction and mental health struggles, her mother was often unable to give Jade the consistent care she needed. Still, Jade made efforts to maintain contact, visiting her mother when possible. When Jade was 14, her mother, Jenny, met Tom Merriman, who will become her stepfather. Tom was older, employed, and outwardly responsible. When Jade's half-brother, Cash, was born, she felt a deep affection for him and wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. At first, Tom was simply her mother's new partner, not playing much of a fatherly role. Their interactions were polite but distant. Over time, though, mutual respect and shared experiences forged a bond between them. Tom even began referring to Jade as his daughter. When Jenny relapsed and missed Cash's first school assembly, Jade realized she needed to step up. She made the difficult but brave choice to move in with Tom and Cash. Taking on the role her mother could no longer fulfill, Jade became the caretaker of the household, cleaning, managing daily routines, and raising her younger brother. This shared responsibility through difficult times brought Jade and Tom closer together. They worked side by side to navigate the chaos her mother's instability created. For Jade, Tom became more than just a stepfather. He was a stable, trusted father figure. After Jenny was taken into custody, Jade stayed with Tom and Cash. They moved into a new home, hoping for a fresh start. By then, Jade was in her early 20s. She continued managing the household and taking full responsibility for her brother. In many ways, Jade had lived between two worlds, one with the consistent love and stability of her father, and another where she was forced to take on adult responsibilities long before her time. Tom was her anchor in the latter world. Their bond became one of deep trust and dependence. That bond, however, would later make the events that unfolded even more disturbing. Tom Merriman, a 64-year-old resident of Solana Beach in San Diego County, was known as a man of strong character and discipline. He had 3 biological sons, but often spoke of having 4 children, always including Jade as his daughter, despite their lack of blood relation. For years, Tom worked in palm tree cultivation, but in 2011, he shifted his career, partnering with a colleague to launch a butterfly farm. The farm specialized in plants designed to attract butterflies, and it became especially successful when people spent more time at home and turned to gardening. Tom was admired for his passion, professionalism, and meticulous care of every plant on his farm. Customers praised him, colleagues respected him, and he was seen as a man who truly loved what he did. But behind this professional success, his personal life told a very different story. Tom was grappling with serious health complications. Years of alcohol misuse had left a devastating impact on his liver and heart. Outwardly, he maintained the appearance of being functional and productive, but behind the scenes, he was under constant medical supervision and dependent on powerful medications. By late 2020, things became even more difficult. After undergoing eye surgery that temporarily impaired his vision, Tom suffered a fall that left him with injuries, requiring an extended stay in a rehabilitation facility. During that time, Jade Jenks took on full responsibility for looking after the family, visiting regularly to keep things in order and prepare for Tom's return. Fully aware that he would not be able to manage on his own, when Jade moved into her mother's household years earlier, she quickly became an active part of the family's daily life. Living with Tom had settled into a routine. He provided financial support and was present from time to time, while Jade handled nearly everything inside the home. But beneath this surface of stability, tensions had begun to quietly build. Over time, Jade realized she was carrying far more than her fair share. She was managing almost all the responsibilities of the household, while Tom seemed increasingly detached. Even though he was the father of her younger brother, it was Jade who handled every detail of his upbringing. The weight of this imbalance left her feeling overwhelmed and resentful. What made matters worse were Tom's frequent, disparaging remarks about her biological father, a man Jade deeply respected and loved. Her father had raised her with stability and consistency, becoming her rock through life's challenges. Tom, however, often belittled her father, making unnecessary comparisons in an effort to paint himself as superior. To Jade, it felt like a direct attempt to erase and replace her father's presence in her life. His words weren't just insulting, they were deeply disrespectful. The unease grew steadily. Jade struggled with the boundaries of her role. She didn't want to abandon her brother, who still relied on her, especially in their mother's absence. Yet, living in an environment where her efforts were ignored and her emotions dismissed became increasingly unbearable. Her contributions had turned into something taken for granted, with no acknowledgement, no gratitude. Eventually, Jade made the decision to move out. It wasn't impulsive, but the result of years of built-up frustration and a longing to reclaim her independence. She shifted her focus to her career, carving out a life that was fully her own. Though she stayed in touch with Tom and her brother, her interactions with Tom remained formal and distant. Her bond with her brother remained strong, but she kept Tom at arm's length. For a while, it seemed like their shared story had quietly come to an end. But then, by sheer coincidence, life pulled them back together. Jade purchased a house on the very same street as Tom, just a few doors away. What began as casual encounters on the sidewalk slowly turned into short conversations, and eventually, occasional dinner invitations. Little by little, their connection began to rebuild. To outsiders, their relationship appeared close and harmonious. Tom seemed genuinely grateful for her presence, especially as his health declined further. Jade didn't show visible signs of anger or resentment, and from the outside, it looked like they had managed to repair their bond. But beneath that surface, Jade's true feelings remained far more complicated. Though she resumed a familiar rhythm of communication with Tom, the warmth was gone. Her presence in his life seemed driven more by obligation than affection. She was polite, attentive, and considerate, but kept her emotions guarded. She was once again inside his home, but no longer felt like she belonged there. What others saw as harmony was little more than a fragile illusion, an uneasy truce hiding under the surface. It was under these conditions that the story took a drastic turn. In late December 2020, while Tom was recovering in a medical facility, Jade was tidying up his house. As she wiped down a table, she accidentally brushed against the computer. It had been in sleep mode, and the screen suddenly lit up. What appeared stunned her. It was a private, intimate photo of herself, fully exposed, one she had once sent years earlier to a former partner in confidence. At first, Jade tried to find a logical explanation, maybe a glitch, maybe a mistake, but it quickly became clear that this was no accident. The image had been deliberately set as the desktop background, filling the entire screen. It was intentional, not some random technical error. She froze, unsure how to respond. In the home of someone she had once trusted, she had just encountered a shocking invasion of her privacy. That moment became a turning point, one that permanently changed her perception of Tom. What she saw wasn't just deeply unsettling, it hinted at something potentially criminal. She had no way of knowing where the images had come from, or, more disturbingly, whether any of them had been taken when she was underage. Though more troubling discoveries still lay ahead, in that instant, Jade understood her life had just shifted irreversibly. Instead of leaving the house, Jade remained, shaken, but driven by the need to understand. She powered up the computer fully and began combing through its files. Outwardly calm, she was inwardly consumed by dread. Opening the file manager, she noticed several hidden folders, each locked with a password. To her shock, one opened. The password was the name of one of her pets. Inside were hundreds of photos, images of herself sorted by year. These were not casual snapshots. They were invasive, captured without her knowledge, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, during moments when she was changing clothes or simply relaxing at home. It was more than disturbing. It shattered her sense of safety. Each new discovery deepened her horror. Some appeared to have been taken with hidden cameras, perhaps surveillance devices installed in the house. At first glance, someone else might have assumed they were random internet images, but Jade knew better. She recognized herself instantly: the pajamas, the room decor, the subtle expressions, the everyday body language no one else should have seen. Her mind struggled to process the sheer volume. The initial shock gave way to horror, then to a deep physical revulsion. Her breathing grew ragged, a wave of nausea hit her, and it felt as though everything around her was collapsing. New folder, each new image only intensified the crushing realization that her life had been built on hidden surveillance and deception. Jade didn't call emergency services. In that moment, her actions weren't guided by logic or planning, but by raw emotion. She began deleting the files. One by one, she opened every folder and subfolder, scanning for duplicates or backups. Yet with each image erased came the painful understanding that this was something she could never delete from memory. Desperately, she searched for a way to destroy everything completely and permanently. Then she found an external hard drive. The realization hit instantly. This was likely where the bulk of the archive was stored. After plugging it in, she discovered the same folder structure, except this time the number of files was even greater. Jade deleted every image, then physically removed the hard drive. She struck it repeatedly with a heavy object until the casing cracked open. Wrapping it in a towel, she carried it outside and tossed it into a garbage bin. Only after making sure the data could never be recovered did she return inside and sink to the floor. Exhausted and unsure what to do next, what she had once thought of as her family now seemed like something else entirely. This wasn't just betrayal, it was the unraveling of everything she believed in. The collapse of the very values her life had been built upon. After destroying the hard drive, Jade found herself spiraling into a state she could no longer control. Sleep became impossible. Each time she closed her eyes, the images returned. In her mind, she saw her own body, familiar yet violated. Again and again, the same thoughts played on a relentless loop. He saw this. He saved this. He looked at it for years. She began to feel an unbearable sense of shame, as though something inside her was ruined, used, no longer her own. Even standing under the shower felt wrong. The water didn't cleanse her. It made her feel more exposed. She scrubbed her skin until it turned red, yet the discomfort remained. Every glance in the mirror carried the eerie sensation of being watched, not as a person, but as an object. That feeling sank deep into her sense of self and refused to let go. Jade lost her appetite completely. Just the thought of food made her stomach twist. Her mind was consumed by relentless, growing anxiety. Every sound outside the door, every footstep in the hall, felt like a threat. She strained to hear noises in the silence, checked the locks repeatedly, left the lights on. The fear never lifted, not even in daylight. One thought dominated everything. If Tom discovered she had found the photos and destroyed them, he would never forgive her. She was certain he was capable of anything, that he could take drastic action. She remembered his past behavior, the control, the harshness disguised as care, and realized how she had once mistaken it for protection. Evenings became the worst. To calm her panic, Jade spread a sheet of plastic she had found in Tom's garage across her bed. It made no rational sense, but it was a desperate attempt to feel clean, to feel safe. Sleep was impossible unless she stayed fully dressed. The lights on, a knife gripped in her hand through the night. Reality and fear blurred together. The paranoia only deepened. The possibility that Tom might discover what she had done became her greatest fear. Her life narrowed into a constant state of bracing for impact. Her body and mind locked in fight or flight. Doubt, panic, revulsion, and terror fused into something unbearable. Rational thought began to fray, and in that fragile state, Jade started planning her next move. Overwhelmed, she reached out to a man she barely knew. Someone she had met once at a party. They were not friends, only a vague memory attached to a phone number. She sent a brief message asking for help, offering no explanation. He read it, but never replied. An hour passed, then a day, and still nothing. His silence only deepened her isolation. No one knew what she was going through. The one person she reached for had either been frightened away or simply didn't want to get involved. Once again, Jade was left alone with her thoughts. One afternoon, she walked into a hardware store. In her basket were items she never imagined buying. Medications that could sedate, a rope, a shower curtain, gloves. Her heart pounded as the cashier glanced at her purchase but said nothing. She paid quickly and left. That night, Jade sat in her car, gripped by indecision. Should she leave? Just drive and never look back? But where could she go? She had no plan. No one to turn to. Only the fear that if she ran, Tom would remain, with backup copies of the images, still able to cause more harm. Inside her, a battle raged. A desperate urge to end it all against the terror of crossing that line. Committing such an act felt unbearable. Yet so did the thought of living with what she had seen. Her life had become a closed loop with no way out. On the morning of December 31, Jade picked Tom up from the rehabilitation center. Despite his frailty and a recent incident of self-harm, doctors had approved his release with a signed waiver. Jade helped him collect his belongings and drove him home. Along the way, and once inside the house, she supported him carefully. He was far too weak to manage on his own. Back at the house, she prepared a comfortable space for him in a first-floor bedroom. She set out water, medication, and pillows. Everything seemed in order, but Jade already had a plan in motion. Along with his discharge, Tom had been prescribed zolpidem, a powerful sleep aid. Knowing its effects, especially in larger doses, Jade handed him several pills under the guise of helping him rest. Tom took them without question. She watched as the sedative took hold. His speech slurred, his movements slowed, and within less than an hour, he was unable to get out of bed. His eyes grew vacant, his breathing heavy. He was alive, but completely incapacitated. Jade sat by his side, calmly watching, without fear or visible emotion, fully aware of how helpless he had become. There was no turning back. Inside her, everything was still. Time, thought, doubt. The house was silent. No shouting, no confrontation, just him lying motionless in bed, and her quietly watching, holding the power to decide what came next. As Tom grew nearly unresponsive, too heavy for her to move alone, Jade realized she needed help getting him inside from the porch. She began sending messages. The first went to a man she had once been casually involved with, Adam Sipliak. She kept it simple. "Can you help me get my stepfather inside? He's not feeling well." Adam came quickly, but when he saw Tom barely responsive, he froze. He sensed immediately that something was wrong. Jade insisted, "Just help me carry him inside." "That's all." Adam touched Tom, felt how unresponsive he was, then stepped back and left without a word. He never replied to her messages again. Jade then contacted another acquaintance, someone younger and more naive. She told him she needed help with some household tasks, but when he arrived and saw a nearly motionless man on the floor, paired with Jade's detached behavior, unease took over. He refused to get involved, saying the situation felt off, and left. Both men sensed danger, but neither called emergency services. They simply walked away, leaving Jade alone with Tom, who was still alive, though shallowly breathing, consciousness fading, body failing. Jade remained alone with him. She didn't act immediately. Hours passed after she managed to pull him back inside. He lay on the floor while she paced in circles, unable to make a final decision, yet far past the point of return. Late at night, she placed a plastic bag over his head. He didn't resist. Jade stood nearby, silently watching as his breathing slowed. Then, without a word, she tightened a rope around his neck. Everything happened in silence. Tom no longer moved. The next morning, she moved his body to her car. She wrapped it in fabric, tied it securely, and pushed it onto the back seat. The vehicle sat for hours, with the windows rolled up under the direct sun. Jade stayed inside the house, paralyzed with uncertainty. Her phone remained silent. No one was looking for Tom. Everything around her was eerily quiet. By evening, she dragged the body into the backyard. Among old boxes and discarded items, she carefully tucked it into a corner, concealed between crates, and covered it with debris. She arranged everything so it blended in, nothing that would draw attention. Then she went back inside and locked the door. A full day passed. Jade didn't leave the house. She ignored phone calls and messages, pretending nothing had happened. No one asked questions. Several more days went by. Tom hadn't contacted anyone. nor had he returned to the rehabilitation center. At first, staff weren't alarmed. Delays were not unusual, but by the third day, concern began to grow. On the fifth day, Jade finally called emergency services. Speaking calmly, she explained that she had been looking after a family friend, Tom. He had spent a few hours at her home after being discharged, then left and never came back. She said she was worried and had no idea where he might be. That call officially set the missing person investigation in motion. Officers arrived the same day. Jade greeted them at the door, polite but visibly tense. She repeated her story. A quick scan of the property and a cursory look inside revealed no obvious red flags, and there was no legal basis for a deeper search. Jade provided a description of what Tom had been wearing and gave his contact information. The next day, staff from the rehabilitation facility informed police that Tom had failed to collect essential documents and medication, and that his phone had been off for several days. This heightened their suspicions. Investigators visited Jade again, and this time the interaction felt different. Her earlier composure had begun to crack. She contradicted herself during questioning. When asked about recent communication with Tom, she admitted deleting their messages. That statement immediately raised concern for investigators. By the following morning, January 2, 2021, police had obtained a search warrant. With legal clearance, they began a detailed examination of Jade's house and yard. The initial sweep revealed very little. No signs of violence, no struggle, no traces of blood. Jade, looking exhausted, answered calmly but briefly, repeating that she had no idea where Tom had gone. The backyard, cluttered with boxes and construction debris, did not draw immediate attention. Investigators noted the mess but moved past it. Further searches that day turned up nothing. The next step was reviewing footage from neighboring security cameras. On one recording, investigators spotted a car pulling up to Jade's house the night Tom vanished. Later, someone was seen carrying an object wrapped in fabric out of the garage. The video quality was poor, but it was enough to raise serious suspicion. Police returned with a key -9 unit. The dogs became alert near the backyard, prompting investigators to re-examine a pile of boxes and tarps stacked in a corner near the alley. Beneath the tarp, they noticed the edge of a carpet. Under it was a body wrapped in cloth. The discovery marked a turning point in the case. Jade was inside the house when officers asked her to step out. At first, she acted confused, as if she didn't understand. When told a body had been found, her reaction was unusually calm. No panits, no tears, just tense silence. The deceased was quickly identified as Tom. Though the body had already begun decomposing, clothing and physical features matched. The investigators had not only digital evidence but also physical proof. Jade's home was sealed off. Her electronic devices were seized, and her message history recovered. Her status shifted from witness to suspect. Taken into custody, she underwent interrogation with an attorney present. She declined to give a statement, maintaining she had no idea how Tom had died and insisting their relationship had been positive until the end. While forensic teams worked, investigators turned to Jade's phone. Analysis uncovered messages where she asked acquaintances to help move Tom. 2 recipients confirmed receiving the texts and testified. On Jade's Notes app, authorities found a disturbing shopping list: gloves, bleach, plastic sheeting, rope. Receipts and surveillance footage confirmed she had purchased these items just days before Tom's death. On her laptop, searches were uncovered for zolpidem effects, toxic doses, and methods of suffocation without leaving signs. Forensic technicians detected Tom's DNA and fibers from his clothing on the carpet where the body had been hidden. On the plastic wrap, Jade's fingerprints were identified. Phone data confirmed she had picked Tom up from the hospital on the day of his death. During that drive, she sent a chilling message. "I've got him. Everything's going according to plan." A visual inspection of the body revealed no obvious trauma, but the autopsy told another story. The medical examiner identified clear signs of suffocation and zolpidem levels far beyond the therapeutic range. The official conclusion: Tom's death was caused by a combination of chemical sedation and asphyxiation. At that point, investigators had no doubt that Tom's death was not accidental. The case now centered on a premeditated act, carefully planned and executed. At the conclusion of the investigation, the district attorney formally charged Jade Jenks with first-degree murder. The case was extensive, supported by digital evidence, eyewitness testimony, and expert reports. The trial drew widespread public attention. Journalists filled the courtroom, and interrogation transcripts were widely circulated. Jade's character and motives became the subject of heated public debate. The prosecution built its case on a variety of evidence, including text messages, purchase history, and her actions before and after Tom's death. Prosecutors argued that Jade had deliberately orchestrated the killing and then tried to cover her tracks. The defense, in contrast, portrayed Jade as a victim. They argued that years of exploitation and betrayal at the hands of Tom had pushed her into emotional collapse and left her feeling hopeless. Jenks's attorneys proposed a plea deal, partial admission of guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and the avoidance of life without parole. But the prosecution rejected the offer, pressing for the maximum penalty. When Jade took the stand for her final statement, she expressed no guilt for Tom's death. Instead, she said her only regret was not walking away from the situation sooner. After a week-long trial and several days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, relying on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the investigation's findings, sentenced Jade Jenks to 25 years to life in prison for Tom Merriman's murder. In his closing remarks, he acknowledged her personal trauma and emotional stress, but emphasized that she had no legal right to take justice into her own hands. Justice, he said, must be carried out within the framework of the law. Following the verdict, the prosecutor stated that justice had been served. He acknowledged the moral complexity of the case, but underscored that, from a legal standpoint, her actions could not be justified. Jade's defense attorneys announced their intention to appeal, arguing that the court had not fully considered the long-term psychological harm she had suffered. The verdict sparked public debate. Some supported the court's decision, stressing the need for legal accountability, while others expressed sympathy for Jade, believing she had been cornered by a system that had failed to protect her. One of the detectives later reflected, "It was one of the most difficult cases of his career. What happened there is too complicated for black and white judgments." But the fact that a life had been taken could not be ignored. Several months later, Jade's appeal was denied. The sentence was upheld. Finally, the Jade Jenks case was closed, leaving behind a heavy sentence and endless controversies. This is a warning: when falling into the tragedy of abuse or mental trauma, people need to seek help from the law and the community, instead of letting the obsession push them into the path of crime, because a wrong decision can destroy both fates and leave a wound that will never fade. Binghamton, a small, peaceful city in New York State, was once so safe that many families did not need to lock their doors when they went to bed. Children rode their bikes, delivered newspapers, played in the parks. Adults lived slowly and trusted each other. In that place, crime seems a distant thing. But on the afternoon of March 26, 1984, that peace was shattered. A 12-year-old girl disappeared on a familiar street while delivering newspapers. The whole city was in a panic, Hundreds of people rushed to search for her, but to no avail. Until the police opened the door, leading to a dark basement in a seemingly innocuous house, they were faced with a gruesome sight. The girl's body lay there, wrapped in an old blanket, with traces of the crime imprinted on the walls. From that moment on, Binghamton was no longer mentioned as a peaceful city. So, who was the killer, and how could such horror hide behind the walls of an ordinary home? To find the answer, stay with us until the very end of this video. Cherry Lindsay was born on June 6, 1971, in Binghamton, New York, USA. She was one of 4 children. Her father worked in law enforcement, and her mother was a homemaker. Since childhood, she has been a creative, dynamic person and actively participates in community activities. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra, enjoyed board games and softball, and even joined the school's softball team. Despite her busy schedule, she also volunteers at the neonatal unit of a local hospital and volunteers with the American Veterans Association. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, neonatologist, or nurse, and she studied and worked hard toward those goals. At age 12, she was in 7th grade and earning good grades. In her free time, Cherry took a part-time job delivering newspapers because she wanted to help others. She planned to save her earnings to throw a party for her favorite teacher, who was expecting a baby. By early 1984, she had been delivering newspapers for about a month. Following a regular route along 2 neighboring streets near her home, residents appreciated her reliability and politeness. She always delivered on time. In the 1,980 seconds, Binghamton was considered a safe city, and many people didn't lock their doors or windows. Cherry's family lives in an area with a low crime rate. Still, her mother often accompanied her on paper routes, and her father, a police officer, encouraged people to be vigilant. On Monday, March 26, 1984, Cherry's mother stayed home to prepare a special dinner and couldn't accompany her. Cherry came home after school and left to deliver papers around 3:30 p.m., promising to return in about an hour so she could call a friend. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her mother later carried lifelong guilt for letting her go alone that day. At 4:30 p.m., the phone rang. It was a neighbor boy, a friend of Cherry's, asking to speak with her. Realizing that Cherry hadn't returned as promised, and knowing how punctual she always was, her mother grew concerned. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Cherry might have lost track of time while talking to someone, but she informed her husband. He immediately notified fellow officers to be vigilant and report anything unusual. Following his instructions, Cherry's mother began calling her daughter's friends and relatives. They checked with Cherry's aunt, to whom she was very close, but she hadn't seen her. An hour passed with no news. No one knows where Cherry is, and her parents are very worried. No one had seen Cherry since she left on her regular paper route. Her father and other officers couldn't wait any longer. They began searching the area, focusing on the 2 streets where she usually walked. They also spoke with people along the route, including Cherry's friends. Her best friend reported that they had seen each other from across the street earlier that day and exchanged a quick wave. Cherry stayed focused on her deliveries and didn't stop to chat. This sighting helped investigators narrow down the timeline of her disappearance. The last time anyone saw Cherry was around 4:00 p.m. She was alone, and witnesses noticed nothing unusual. Some people assumed she had gone to visit friends and would return soon. Her parent disagreed. She was a homebody, never went out without permission, and all her belongings were still in her room. By 7:00 p.m., her father, himself a police officer, and other officers had interviewed most residents on the 2 streets where Cherry usually delivered newspapers. They found nothing useful. That evening, the police department alerted the entire city, bringing more officers into the search. By the next morning, firefighters, county and state police, Kminusnina units, and a police helicopter joined in. The search area expanded into the outskirts, but no trace of Cherry was found. Her father was one of the most active searchers. He frequently called home, hoping Cherry had returned, and it was all a misunderstanding. Each time, his wife tearfully told him there was no news, until she remembered something important. She recalled that during her paper route, Cherry was afraid of a house 7 blocks away. A man there always stared at her in a way that gave her goosebumps. Cherry mentioned it to her mother repeatedly. Her father took this lead seriously. Police went to the house, but no one answered the door, and it seemed empty. Without cause to force entry, they had to leave. He kept the address in mind. About 30 hours of unsuccessful searching passed. With no new information, police held a press conference to draw public attention. Several tips came in, but all were dead ends. Soon after, the previously absent resident of that house appeared. Detectives went to see him. He is James Wales, 35 years old. He lives a quiet, normal life and rarely attracts attention. He remembered Cherry, who had delivered his papers, but said he hadn't seen her in days and didn't know where she was. There was no basis to arrest him, but detectives found him unsettling and took interest. With no other leads, they began to focus on him. News of the suspicious resident spread. A local journalist visited James, who let him in and answered questions about Cherry, though he seemed reluctant and quickly grew nervous. The journalist reported his concerns to police on March 27, 1984. Cherry's father ran a records check on James. He had no serious criminal history, only prior incidents of drunk driving and trespassing. The trespassing occurred years earlier when, drunk after leaving a bar, he wandered into a field a few kilometers from home. No one was harmed, and he received a warning. A deeper look revealed something more troubling. Years before Cherry went missing, James lived in Normandy, New York. The files show that the parents of a boy once filed a complaint alleging that James committed abuse. The case was transferred to social services and then closed without law enforcement action. He was never charged. These findings increased suspicion that he might be involved in Cherry's disappearance. Detectives met with him again. They noted he was unusually nervous, dodged direct questions, and avoided eye contact, especially when asked about Cherry, further heightening their concern. Despite James denying he saw Cherry on the day she disappeared, detectives brought him to the station for formal questioning. There, detectives found James uncomfortable communicating, unwilling to cooperate, and almost immediately requested a lawyer. While James was being questioned, his wife also spoke to the police. Convinced that her husband had nothing to do with Cherry's disappearance, she agreed to have her home searched. Investigators soon found a paper bag matching the one Cherry used for her newspapers and Cherry's earrings in a dresser drawer. 2 hours later, the search continued. A detective went down to the basement and discovered what looked like dried blood. In the back of the room, they found a blanket wrapped around a girl's body. It was 12 years old, Cherry Lindsay. She was dead. Meanwhile, at the station, James continued to deny any involvement. James admitted he knew Cherry. Like other neighbors, he received newspapers from her and described her as very punctual. He offered nothing else. When informed about the discovery in his home, he stopped cooperating. Detectives believed his resistance wouldn't last. About 90 minutes later, James confessed. He said Cherry had delivered the newspaper and he lured her inside. She screamed immediately. He tried to silence her by covering her mouth, but she fought back and he began strangling her. As Cherry struggled harder, he grew enraged, grabbed a table leg, and struck her head several times. She lost consciousness, but was still alive. He tied her hands behind her back, stuffed her t-shirt in her mouth, opened the basement door, and threw her down the stairs. Cherry sustained more injuries in the fall. James followed her downstairs, wrapped a clothesline around her neck, and continued strangling her for several minutes. When she showed no signs of life, he abused her without removing the rope. He claimed he had not intended to kill her and blamed the attack on uncontrollable, impulsive violence. He then returned to his routine, finished cooking dinner, and went back to the basement. About 15 minutes later, unsure if Cherry was dead, he used the rope still around her neck to make certain. He hung her from a sewer pipe for about half an hour. Afterward, he wrapped her body, clothes, and some belongings in a blanket, collected her newspapers and the money she had earned that day, showered, changed, and removed the clothes he had worn during the crime. He went to the basement several more times to check if she was dead. His calm, detached description of these actions suggested a complete lack of remorse. Ironically, 35 years old, James was the same man who had helped Cherry with her paper route. Though Cherry had found him creepy and strange and was wary of him, he had shown her the route for delivering newspapers. Investigators now suspect this was part of a plan to gain her trust and lure her to her death. To understand how he came to commit such a crime, police examined his background. They quickly learned James's life was marked by violence. His father died when he was young. His stepfather was abusive and drank heavily. His mother, also an alcoholic, joined in punishing him rather than protecting him. James started drinking in school and later used illegal substances. James was a troubled teenager who repeatedly tried to flee his abusive parents. Despite multiple reports of domestic violence, law enforcement took no action. At 17, he finally escaped from his mother and stepfather and enlisted in the United States of America Army. He served for 6 years and earned honors and awards. He returned to Norway in 1972 and married 3 times. His last wife was Sue Ellen. They had 2 children and, for a time, lived a normal life. After leaving the army, he worked at International Business Machines, but lost his job in 1983 due to long-standing alcohol and banned substance abuse. After being fired, his mental health deteriorated. His wife tried to support him, but they never sought professional help. He displayed paranoia and delusions, yet no official diagnosis was made, and he received no treatment. According to his wife and witnesses, he was a ticking time bomb, warnings that went unheeded until it was too late. Investigators later discovered that James had an unexpected accomplice. He had not forced Cherry into his house. She went there willingly. However, her family insisted that she would never have gone with such a suspicious man of her own accord. James had used his 11-year-old stepson, Brian. Knowing approximately when Cherry delivered newspapers, James watched for a moment when she was alone. When he saw her without her mother, he told Brian to help. Brian, who knew Cherry, invited her inside. During police questioning, Brian admitted that James had ordered him to do this. As soon as Cherry entered, James appeared and told Brian to leave. The boy ran to his upstairs room. He feared something terrible would happen, but stayed silent out of fear. After James confessed to the murder, police returned to the house to gather corroborating evidence in case he later recanted. Inside, they found Cherry's newspapers and the money she had collected, both stolen by James. Blood on the basement floor and wall indicated she had been beaten and thrown down the stairs. They recovered a blood-stained sewer pipe used to hang her, along with pieces of clothesline and fragments of her clothing. Evidence also showed the murder was premeditated. Before Cherry began her paper route, James did not subscribe to that newspaper. He subscribed only after she started working. Witnesses said he fixated on her, even following and observing her route. Based on this evidence, on April 6, 1984, James Wales was charged with second-degree murder, abuse, kidnapping, burglary, and abuse of a corpse. He was arrested, held in the county jail, and denied bail as a particularly dangerous offender. Unable to afford an attorney, he was assigned a public defender. The defense first sought his release on bail and requested a change of venue due to extensive local publicity that could compromise an impartial jury. Both requests were denied. The defense then filed an insanity plea. In 1984, the state governor signed a bill revising the standard for insanity defenses, shifting the burden to showing the defendant did not understand right from wrong. The attorney believed this was James's only chance to avoid a life sentence. The trial, initially set for July 30, 1984, was postponed multiple times at the defense's request. The trial finally began on October 18, 1984. The prosecutor presented detailed evidence: the rope used to strangle Cherry, a table leg with her blood, and James's confession, which he later tried to retract by claiming insanity. The evidence also included the newspapers and money he took after the murder. During the hearing, a defense psychiatrist testified that he believed James was insane, diagnosing him with intermittent explosive disorder, a relatively common condition marked by unpredictable anger and violent outbursts. At the time, about 200,000 people in the United States had been diagnosed with this disorder. According to the expert, James could not resist his impulses to do harm. The psychiatrist said that during multiple meetings with James in jail, he observed a range of disturbing symptoms. In one session, James claimed that during the murder, he believed he was attacking his mother, not Cherry. He blamed his mother for his abusive childhood, hated her, and wanted revenge. The psychiatrist concluded that James was unable to consider the consequences of his actions or control himself at the time of the crime. Two of James's ex-wives also testified. They said he had a tendency toward violence that could take disturbing forms. For example, James likes to strangle during intimacy and has a hard time stopping. The court then heard a detailed account of the murder and the horrors Cherry endured. Cherry's parents struggled to listen. The medical examiner testified that it took about 30 minutes for her to die from strangulation. Based on James's own timeline, even when he hung Cherry in the basement, she may still have been alive. Brian also testified against James. These events were deeply traumatic for 11-year-old Brian. He said he heard screams and muffled thuds. Cherry cried for help, and then it went quiet. Brian was too scared to leave the room because he knew how cruel James could be. He feared he would be attacked next. After 11 days of trial, the jury began deliberations. Notably, the jury did not see all the evidence investigators gathered. The judge excluded crime scene photos of Cherry, her torn clothing, and the marks left on her body, believing such shocking images might prevent the jury from remaining impartial. After 3 hours and 15 minutes, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The insanity defense failed. On November 12 of that year, James Wales was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 33 years, the maximum allowed by state law. In his final statement, he said he was sorry, but it sounded unconvincing. As throughout the trial, James remained impassive and showed no emotion. When issuing the sentence, the judge, citing the brutality of the crime, urged the state never to grant James parole. However, James qualified for the first time in 2017. Cherry's parents could not accept this loss. They moved out of the family home and eventually put it up for sale. By then, the house had a grim reputation. Many believed Cherry's spirit was unsettled and that strange events occurred there. The house became known as haunted. Twice, new residents abandoned it, and neighbors reported moving objects, voix, and unexplained sounds. On July 30, 2020, the ghost house was demolished. At that moment, Cherry's mother also discarded her daughter's newspaper bag, deciding it was finally time to let her go. Cherry's father, however, believed her spirit would only be at peace once the killer died behind bars. The city council honored Cherry's memory in 1984 by naming a local park after her and installing a small memorial there. James was first granted parole on April 12, 2017. Like any American inmate, he could appear before a parole board, and he exercised that right. His hearings were met with public protests organized by Cherry's parents. James told the board he struggled with stress, had a difficult childhood due to his abusive grandfather, and believed he would never have killed Cherry if not for a mental health crisis. Despite his statements, the parole board denied his release. Cherry's parents continued to hold public demonstrations, calling for him to remain imprisoned for life. Ahead of each new hearing, they intensified their efforts to seek justice for their daughter. 3 years later, James became eligible for parole again. A supporter of Cherry and her family launched an online petition that gathered more than 9,000 signatures. In total, 409 pages of signatures and 120 pages of comments were submitted to the board. James was denied parole a second time. And again, in 2023, law enforcement maintained that he should remain behind bars for life. Another hearing was scheduled for 2025. Throughout this period, Cherry's family appealed to the public, doing everything they could to prevent his release. On February 28, 2023, Cherry's father died at age 81 after a brief battle with liver cancer. Before his death, he asked that James never be released. In 2025, James was denied parole again. The next hearing is scheduled for 2 years later. Cherry's mother and others fear that in 2027, the board may consider releasing James, in part because of the terminal illness he has suffered from for years. Although the family's leading advocate, Cherry's father, has passed away, his cause continues online and in person. Many supporters, including Cherry's mother, remain determined to ensure that James is never released from prison. On a quiet spring night in 2015, the town of Somerville, South Carolina, was shaken by a disappearance that would soon unravel into one of its darkest tragedies. Ashley Pegram, a 28-year-old single mother of 3, disappeared after meeting a stranger online. This is not just the story of Ashley's final hours, it is a story of betrayal, of a family's desperate search for truth. It was spring 2015 in the quiet town of Somerville, near Charleston. Ashley, a hard-working single mom raising 3 young children, had connected with someone on the app Meet Me. They had also been messaging on Kik for about a month before deciding to meet in person. On the evening of the 3rd of April, 2015, around 9:30 p.m., Edward picked her up from her home in a Hyundai Sonata. The next morning, Ashley's family received a message claiming she had been dropped off at a gas station because she was too drunk. But that story didn't make sense. Ashley wasn't the type to disappear without checking in, especially with her kids waiting at home. Panicked, her family immediately reported her missing, leading to a community search and an urgent police investigation. To truly understand why Ashley's disappearance struck such a deep chord, we need to look at the woman behind the headlines. Ashley Pegram grew up in Somerville, South Carolina, in a close-knit family that valued togetherness. She shared a modest home with her mother and sister, Brandy Chance, sometimes even sharing one phone for the whole household. At just 28 years old, Ashley was already a devoted mother of 3. Friends and family described her as a loving, playful parent, the kind of mum who turned chores into games and always put her kids first. But life hadn't been easy. Years earlier, the father of her sons had passed away, leaving her to grapple with grief. At times, she leaned on alcohol to cope with the pain, though her mother made sure those struggles never touched the children. That April evening, Ashley told her family she was heading out for a casual night, just a drink or two. She wore jeans, a grey sweater, and new shoes, keeping it simple. When Edward Bonilla, 30, the man she had been talking to, arrived in his Sonata, he didn't come to the door or introduce himself. He just waited in the car, which struck her family as odd. Still, Ashley got in, and the two drove off. They ended up at a bonfire hosted by Edward's brother. It was a casual gathering. People around a fire, others playing ping pong in the garage. Ashley seemed relaxed, chatting with people she'd never met before. One attendee later recalled that Ashley was friendly and easy to talk to. She had a couple of beers from the 6-pack she'd brought, but showed no signs of intoxication. She was steady, engaged, and in control. By about 11:45 p.m., Edward decided it was time to leave. Ashley wasn't in a hurry. She still had beer left and seemed to want to stay, but he took the rest of her 6-pack and ushered her out. Just after midnight on April 5th, they pulled into a gas station on College Park Road. Security cameras captured Ashley going inside at 12:04 a.m., using the restroom, and leaving at 12:11 a.m. She appeared fine, calm, and composed. She got back into the Sonata, and the two drove off together. After that, according to Edward's later account, things got heated in the car. He said Ashley started yelling, accusing him of stealing her mum's phone. Even though she hadn't taken the family phone with her that night, he claimed she became so upset that she wandered out near a mobile home park, which was only about 1.5 miles from her house. He said he let her out there to use the bathroom again and then drove off after the argument, assuming she would walk home. But as the hours passed and Ashley never returned, it became clear something far more sinister had happened that night. Ashley's house was silent that night. Her usual, "Mom, I'm home," never came. At 3:29 a.m., Edward sent a kick message to the family phone, saying he hoped Ashley was okay. He claimed he left her at a gas station because she was too drunk. However, this didn't match what others saw at the bonfire, where Ashley didn't seem very intoxicated. By morning on the 4th of April, the silence became unbearable. Ashley's mother noticed she hadn't returned, so she checked the phone and saw Edward's message. Her sister, Brandy, immediately began calling his number over and over. When Edward finally called back, his story shifted. Now he claimed he'd dropped Ashley near a mobile home park. That sudden change sent alarm bells ringing. Brandy and her mother rushed out, walking the dark roadside near the park, peering into ditches, terrified she might have fallen or been struck by a car. They found nothing. Still, Brandy couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest. As hours passed with no sign of Ashley, panic grew. The family reached out to friends, spreading word of her disappearance. Everyone knew Ashley would never abandon her children. By that evening, her mother called dispatch to file a missing persons report. She laid out the details of the date, the late-night messages, and just how out of character this was. With those early red flags, the Dorchester County Sheriff's Office quickly took action. Detective Sergeant Martin was assigned on the 7th of April, just days after Ashley was last seen. He started where most cases begin, with the people closest to her. Brandy recounted everything: the shared family phone Ashley had left behind, the 3:29 a.m. kick message, and Edward's inconsistent stories. Martin quickly saw that this wasn't a case of someone walking away from their life. Ashley had no history of disappearing. She was a devoted mother, with no enemies, no bitter disputes. Her world revolved around her kids. Friends and neighbors echoed the same picture. Ashley was lively, photogenic, the kind of person who lit up family gatherings. No one recalled seeing strange cars beyond Edward's Sonata that night, nor hearing arguments near the house. Still, some hinted at her vulnerability, saying grief sometimes led her into impulsive choices. One friend remembered Ashley was depressed, making poor decisions and things like that because of it. Neighbors joined the family in combing ditches and wooded lots, but the searches came up empty. Police pushed flyers, took in tips, and monitored social media, but no breakthrough came. Then came Edward. On the 8th of April, at 6:00 p.m., he walked into the sheriff's office for an interview. At first, he seemed cooperative. He outlined his story, picking Ashley up, going to the bonfire, her drinking, the stop at the gas station, the argument about a stolen phone, and finally dropping her near the mobile home park. He even pointed to a scuff mark on his car's front right quarter panel, claiming Ashley had kicked it in anger. But Martin's eyes caught a detail Edward didn't expect. The mark wasn't shaped like a normal kick. It was narrow at the bottom and wider at the top, exactly the kind of impression you'd see if someone had been on their back, kicking upward. Edward also slipped in small lies, like claiming he was unemployed due to an ankle injury, that raised even more suspicion. Investigators moved fast to test his story. They pulled security footage from the gas station on College Park Road. The video confirmed the timeline: the Sonata pulling in at 12:04 a.m. Ashley stepping out, calm and steady, using the restroom and getting back into the car at 12:11 p.m. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't distressed. The footage shattered Edward's claim that she was too drunk to stand. Then, investigators turned their attention to the mobile home park. Edward swore he'd dropped Ashley there, but nearby surveillance told a different story. A garage at the intersection had cameras pointed directly at the road. When detectives reviewed the tapes, no Hyundai Sonata appeared during the time frame Edward described. His alibi collapsed on the spot. Why insist he'd been there if the cameras proved otherwise? Detectives circled back to the bonfire, re-interviewing attendees. Edward's brother's girlfriend, who had known the family for years, gave a clear impression. Ashley arrived around 9:30 p.m. Friendly, steady, and in no way stumbling drunk. In fact, Ashley wanted to stay longer, but Edward abruptly ended the night, even scooping up the beers she'd brought. Other guests echoed the same. Ashley was relaxed, social, enjoying herself. No aggression. This painted a starkly different picture from Edward's story of a drunk, unruly woman. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source. A tip from Edward's ex-girlfriend revealed he wasn't unemployed at all. He worked at cobble flooring and had access to company vans. When Detective Martin confronted him at the job site, Edward fumbled, claiming he had just started a few days ago. His boss quickly corrected him, saying Edward has been working there for 8 months. The lie raised even more questions. Why conceal his work? What was he hiding about those vans? Investigators acted fast. Edward's boss mentioned that he had seen Edward heading to the company van as if to retrieve something. Martin moved quickly, securing the Ford Econoline before Edward could touch it. Inside, the sight was chilling. Red stains streaked the walls, ceiling, and scattered items. A dented polyurethane missing its handle, tested positive for blood. Detectives collected Ashley's DNA standards, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and sent everything to the lab. Within days, results came back. The blood in the van was Ashley's. The spatter patterns suggested something far worse, that she had suffered repetitive force while still alive. Attention then shifted to the sonata. With Edward's mother's cooperation, investigators located it in North Charleston and seized it for processing. No obvious blood was found, but the suspicious shoe print on the car's panel was preserved. Step by step, Edward's carefully spun story was unraveling. Digital forensics made the noose even tighter. Cell phone records showed Edward's device pinging towers far from his normal routes. On the 4th of April, between 6:44 a.m. and 7:12 a.m. His phone was in Harleyville. Hours later, pings placed him back near work. What was he doing there? Search efforts widened. Authorities scoured reservoirs near Edward's apartment complex, even calling in the Department of Natural Resources to help scan the alligator-infested waters by boat and air. But no trace of Ashley surfaced. Still, investigators knew the case was building. By mid-April, the evidence was overwhelming: blood in the van, phone pings pointing to suspicious travel, witnesses contradicting Edward's story, and his lies about even the simplest details. On the 15th of April, 2015, detectives decided enough was enough. They moved to arrest Edward Bonilla for obstruction of justice, citing his repeated deceptions. When officers arrived at his apartment complex, the scene only deepened their suspicions. Edward was dragging a suitcase toward a rental SUV, seemingly preparing to vanish. The timing was telling. He was taken into custody without resistance. What began as a missing persons case was now a homicide investigation, with Edward squarely in the spotlight. To understand Edward Bonilla, investigators dug into his background. Born and raised in Dorchester County, he attended local schools, where classmates remembered him as someone who blended in with the crowd. He had a brother, Anthony, and the family often gathered for casual get-togethers, like the bonfire Ashley attended that night. Outwardly, Edward seemed ordinary, with a steady job and a long-term girlfriend, but text records revealed another side. While making plans with his partner about dinner and intimacy, he was also messaging Ashley. It painted the picture of a man leading a double life, showing little concern for loyalty or honesty. Professionally, Edward had worked at Cobble Flooring for 8 months, installing flooring and driving company vans. His criminal record was minimal. No serious charges that might have raised alarms, but people who knew him later described a pattern of disregard toward women. When first questioned after his arrest, Edward stuck to the story he'd told before. He repeated the detail about her supposedly accusing him of stealing her mother's phone and kicking his car in anger. But detectives pressed him about the inconsistencies, particularly the surveillance footage showing no Sonata near the mobile home park. As the weeks passed and evidence like Ashley's blood in the van was presented, his answers grew evasive. Though he never confessed outright during interrogations, the walls were closing in. By early May, the case took a decisive turn. On May 5, 2015, based on the forensic results and the mounting circumstantial evidence, Edward Bonilla's charges were upgraded to murder. Investigators didn't believe the crime was premeditated. Instead, they theorized it stemmed from a confrontation that escalated into violence. His pattern of disrespect toward women, combined with Ashley's resistance that night, suggested the encounter spiraled out of control. Just 3 days later, on May 8, 2015, during a private consultation with his attorney, Edward finally broke. He revealed the location of Ashley's body, a remote, wooded tract off Brown Road near Harleyville, the same area where his phone had pinged weeks earlier. Authorities launched a search immediately. On May 9, 2015, search teams, including volunteers and dogs, scoured the site. Deep in the woods, far from any main road, they discovered Ashley's remains, She had been there for more than 5 weeks, lying face down in the mud. Her body was naked except for a red bra, partly wrapped around her neck. Nearby lay a black garment. Her eyeglasses, later matched to family photos, confirmed her identity. Black electrical tape was still looped around her right wrist and neck. Clear evidence of restraint. The autopsy ruled her death a homicide by violence. Discolorations on her scalp were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. Even after the discovery, Edward's story shifted only slightly. He suggested that restraint during the altercation had gone wrong, but he stopped short of taking full responsibility. By then, however, the evidence spoke louder than his words. The investigation had moved into its next phase, preparing for trial. The trial began on August 8, 2016, in Dorchester County and lasted 4 days. The prosecution argued that Edward intentionally killed Ashley, presenting a timeline of lies and physical proof. They showed gas station surveillance footage of Ashley appearing sober, which contradicted Edward's claim that she was extremely drunk. Phone records and cell tower data showed Edward was in remote locations like Harleyville soon after Ashley disappeared. Near where her body was eventually discovered, experts testified that bloodstains on Edward's work truck showed repeated blunt force trauma, consistent with autopsy results. The prosecution also pointed out that Ashley had a muscle relaxant called cyclohexanone in her system, which she had no reason to take, suggesting she was drugged without her knowledge. Furthermore, the prosecution emphasized that Edward's story changed multiple times, including where he claimed to have left Ashley. They also highlighted his lies about his job and his attempt to escape before being arrested. The prosecution concluded that his actions were not accidental, but a deliberate cover-up of a crime. The defense argued that Ashley's death was a tragic accident caused by a misunderstanding. Edward testified that Ashley became angry after they stopped at a gas station, accusing him of stealing and getting out of the car. He said he accidentally ran her over while backing up. Then, to stop her from attacking him, he held her in what he described as a bear hug, possibly a chokehold. He didn't realize she had stopped breathing until it was too late. Edward admitted he panicked. He put Ashley in the trunk of the Sonata temporarily, then left her on a frontage road. Later, he used his work van to move her body and bury her in a shallow grave. Using a board as a shovel, the defense pointed out that Edward had no serious criminal record. They suggested that the blood evidence was consistent with an accidental struggle, not a deliberate murder. They asked the jury to consider lesser charges, such as involuntary manslaughter, arguing that it was a brief loss of control without any intention to kill Ashley. After deliberating, a jury found Edward Bonilla guilty of murder on August 11, 2016. The judge described the handling and disposal of the body as particularly cruel and sentenced Edward to life in prison without parole. He appealed the conviction in 2019, arguing issues with evidence, admission, and trial conduct, but the South Carolina Court of Appeals upheld the decision, affirming the life sentence. In Cottonwood Heights, Utah, at 11:47 p.m., a call was secretly recorded. During that conversation, Jennifer confessed to her lover that she had killed her husband, Matthew. From that moment on, the truth about a seemingly perfect marriage began to emerge, leading to one of the most shocking family crimes in Utah. Jennifer Gledhill and Matthew Johnson seemed to have it all. Living in their million-dollar home in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, they appeared to be the perfect family, a devoted military husband and a caring mother, raising their 3 children, aged 11, 7, and 5. Matthew, 51, was a respected member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group, Known for his reliability and brilliance, his fellow soldiers said he was the kind of man they could always count on for answers. Jennifer, 42, was seen as a devoted mother and supportive military wife, whom many of Matthew's friends described as nice and rather reclusive, but beneath the surface, their marriage had begun to fracture months earlier. In August 2024, Jennifer filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew, claiming she needed protection from him. Yet, when the case reached 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus, he dismissed the request. The commissioner noted that text messages from Jennifer to Matthew were repeatedly berating, belittling, and demeaning, if not outright attempts, to goad him into a violent response on the 16th of September, 2024, just days before the tragedy that would shatter their family forever. Commissioner Minus dismissed the protective order, ruling that no abuse had occurred. In the weeks leading up to September, Matthew's friends noticed changes. Jennifer's behavior had become so erratic that Matthew sometimes stayed overnight at a National Guard facility, telling those close to him that he feared for his safety. In one of his final conversations with a longtime friend, retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson, Matthew said he was ready to move on and file for divorce. Behind his back, Jennifer was living a double life. She was deeply involved in an affair with another man, an affair so intense that it consumed her thoughts. On the 19th of September, just days before Matthew's death, Jennifer showed her lover a loaded Glock 19X she kept in the home. At the time, he brushed it off. Firearms weren't unusual in a military family, but prosecutors later argued this was part of a calculated plan. She had arranged for their 3 children to stay at her parents' house the night she planned to kill Matthew. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The 20th of September, 2024, began like any other day. But by evening, the fragile facade of the marriage would finally crumble. Matthew had discovered the truth about his wife's affair, and witnesses would later report hearing a heated argument between the couple that night. According to Jennifer's later confession, Matthew confronted her, yelling because he knew she had been sleeping with someone else. The argument was intense, years of marital problems finally exploding into the open. What happened next would haunt everyone who learned about it. In the early hours of the 21st of September, 2024, as Matthew lay sleeping in their master bedroom, completely vulnerable and unaware of the danger, Jennifer made a decision that would destroy him forever. She took his own 9mm handgun and shot him in the head while he slept. By her own confession, she then put Matthew's body into a rooftop storage container, sliding it down the stairs of their home before loading it into the back of their minivan. She smashed his phone and drove his truck to a nearby neighborhood, abandoning it blocks from their home. Then, in what can only be described as a methodical cover-up, Jennifer drove north with her husband's body and buried him in a shallow grave at a location that remains unknown to this day. When she returned home, she began an extensive cleanup operation. She bleached the walls, used carpet cleaning supplies throughout the master bedroom, and ordered a new mattress to replace the blood-soaked one where Matthew had been killed. The mattress arrived just 2 days later, but Jennifer's most critical mistake was yet to come. On the 22nd of September, just before midnight, Jennifer showed up at her lover's home and made a confession that would ultimately lead to her arrest. She told him everything: how she had killed Matthew, how she had disposed of his body, and how she had cleaned up the crime scene. The man noticed bruises on Jennifer's body during their conversation, and when he asked about them, she casually explained that she had gotten them while burying her husband and cleaning the house of evidence. Her lover was terrified by what he had heard. Jennifer, whom he thought he knew, had just confessed to cold-blooded murder with an almost casual demeanor. The truth was about to come out, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Jennifer's lover was so disturbed by her confession that he decided to record their next phone conversation. When he told Jennifer that he was frightened by what she had told him, her response was chilling and would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. She exclaimed that she thinks she could even hurt a fly, and said that Matthew's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. The cold detachment in her voice was unmistakable. She had dehumanized her husband so completely that his death meant nothing to her. But Jennifer's disturbing revelations didn't stop there. When her lover asked if she would do anything differently if she could turn back time, Jennifer replied, no. She also asked her lover not to think of her as a monster and to remember who she was before the confession. The irony was not lost. She was asking for understanding after confessing to murdering the father of her children in cold blood. What made this conversation even more significant was that it took place before Matthew was officially reported missing. Jennifer was already referring to her husband in the past tense. Even though no one else knew he was dead, 6 days after confessing to her lover, Jennifer finally reported Matthew missing to the police. She told them that Matthew had said he would be gone for a week and instructed her not to call him. Meanwhile, the Utah National Guard had already begun searching for Matthew when he failed to report for duty on the 23rd of September. Unbeknownst to Jennifer, her lover had been collecting evidence against her, including screenshots of their text messages and recordings of their phone conversations. On the 2nd of October, 2024, he contacted the police with information that would crack the case wide open. On the 2nd of October, 2024, armed with the recorded confessions and physical evidence, police arrested Jennifer Gledhill on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. When Cottonwood Heights, Utah police executed a search warrant on the Gledhill home. They discovered a scene that told a very different story than the one Jennifer had presented. In the master bedroom, investigators found a large blood-stained spot on the carpet beneath the bed. Blood was also found on the bed frame slats, which corroborated Jennifer's confession to her lover. The house reeked of bleach, and there were reddish-brown stains on the walls, bed frame, and blinds. Tellingly, the mattress in the bedroom was brand new. Phone records later revealed that Jennifer had ordered it on the 24th of September, just 3 days after the murder. It had been delivered 2 days later. During the investigation, police also discovered GPS data from Jennifer's phone showing her movements on the 21st of September and 22nd. The data showed her traveling to the location where Matthew's truck was found at around 6:00 a.m. and later tracking her journey north toward Davis County, exactly where she claimed to have buried his body. But the investigation was far from over. On the 24th of October, 2024, Jennifer's parents, Thomas Gledhill, 71, and Rosalie Gledhill, 68, were also arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. Police discovered that they had spent over 5 hours at Jennifer's house in late September. Despite initially claiming they were only there for less than an hour to pick up clothing, investigators found that Rosalie had purchased the new mattress and had her phone remotely reset, erasing all data about her whereabouts during the cleanup period. When police questioned Thomas about the master bedroom and the alleged cleanup, he said he did not go in where the incident happened, inadvertently revealing knowledge of a crime scene. During a search of Jennifer's parents' home, police found a Glock 19X gun box wrapped in a child's onesie inside a plastic tote near Jennifer's bedroom. The container matched the description of the gun Jennifer had shown to her lover on the 19th of September. The family had tried to cover up the perfect murder, but their web of lies was quickly unraveling. Months have passed since Jennifer's arrest, but Matthew Johnson's body remains missing. Extensive search efforts have covered multiple counties, extending from Davis counties all the way to Box Elder County near the Utah border. Over 70 searchers have participated in the ongoing efforts to find Matthew, including law enforcement, volunteers, and Matthew's own military friends who have organized their own search parties. As his friend Kevin Thompson said, the fact that the search is now in its 5th month keeps them up at night. John Hash, Matthew's fellow Green Beret, who served with him for 12 years, has been frustrated by the ongoing search efforts. He said, having had Jennifer in his home before, breaking bread with them, it turned out she's responsible for Matthew's death. It was shocking. Frankly, during recent court hearings, prosecutors revealed that a vehicle storage container had been found floating in water and it contained Matthew's blood inside. This discovery provided additional physical evidence linking Jennifer to the crime, but Matthew's body still hasn't been recovered. The search continues to expand across northern Utah as investigators follow every lead, hoping to finally bring Matthew home to his family. They were about to discover a secret Jennifer had hoped would never see the light of day. Jennifer Gledhill has pleaded not guilty to all charges against her. She faces 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of possession of a controlled substance, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. During her bail hearing, prosecutors argued that Jennifer posed a significant danger to the community and to the integrity of the investigation. They revealed that she had told her lover she would shoot herself rather than go to jail, demonstrating both her desperation and potential for further violence. The judge sided with the prosecutors and denied Jennifer's request for bail, noting the risk she posed to the community. She remains in custody at the Salt Lake County Jail. Adding another layer of complexity to the case is the matter of Matthew's $500,000 Prudential life insurance policy, with Jennifer named as the beneficiary. Because Jennifer is facing murder charges and Matthew's body is still missing, Prudential has asked the court to determine who should receive the money. Jennifer's trial is scheduled to begin on the 8th of December, 2025, and is expected to last 8 days. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is the plight of the 3 children who have lost both parents, 1 to murder and 1 to imprisonment. Matthew Johnson's family has released a statement through their victim representative saying they are hopeful that they will find Matthew soon, or that Jennifer or someone will come forward with the location of his body so they can properly lay him to rest. The prosecution's theory is straightforward but chilling. Jennifer Gledhill killed her husband because he discovered her affair, and she wanted to be free to pursue her relationship with her lover rather than go through a messy divorce that might have resulted in shared custody and financial obligations. She chose murder. As we await Jennifer Gledhill's trial in December 2025, one question haunts everyone involved in this case. How does a mother of 3 justify destroying so many lives for the sake of an affair? Perhaps we'll never fully understand the depths of her selfishness and cruelty. What we do know is that her actions have created wounds that will never fully heal. Justice may eventually be served, but Matthew Johnson will never come home to his children, and somewhere in northern Utah, a devoted father and soldier lies in an unmarked grave, waiting for someone to finally tell the truth about where he can be found. On September 18, 2005, an Ottawa police officer took his family for a walk in the park. In the middle of a quiet trail, he stopped suddenly. A pungent stench wafted through the autumn wind, a smell he recognized immediately. The smell of death. He followed the trail, deep into the bushes, and there, just a few dozen feet from the trail, under a hastily covered layer of leaves, was a half-decomposed body. It was naked, its clothes gone, and its face unrecognizable. It was Jennifer Teague, the 18 years old, who had disappeared just over a week earlier. On her way home from a night shift, the terrible truth was revealed. Jennifer was no longer alive, and this was no accident. She had been murdered by someone still at large, possibly in the very neighborhood her family had thought was the safest. Now Ottawa was gripped by fear, and one haunting question spread through every home: who killed Jennifer Teague? And how had a predator been walking freely among them, unseen until it was too late? Jennifer Teague was born on June 30, 1987, in Ottawa, Canada. She is the youngest of 3 siblings and is always taken care of by her 2 older brothers. After her parents divorced, she and her mother moved in with her grandmother. Her father lived nearby and remained an important part of their lives. In school, Jennifer was passionate about sports. She played baseball and soccer and was especially devoted to hockey. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of her favorite players. Around the same time, she discovered a love for environmental protection and joined a group that visited elementary schools to teach kids about caring for nature. When she reached high school, Jennifer took on part-time jobs to pay her own expenses and save for the future. She wasn't sure what career to pursue after graduation. She considered fashion design, but also thought about working in environmental protection. By September 2005, at 18 years old, she had started her senior year and was eagerly looking forward to graduation. She continued working the evening shift at a local Wendy's while attending school. At the time, she had adopted a kitten from a rescue and was looking forward to her next paycheck so she could get her cat vaccinated. On Wednesday, September 7, after school, Jennifer took a short break at home and then left for her evening shift. Taking the bus to work, around midnight, she closed the restaurant and began walking home. The buses had stopped running, so she faced a walk of just over a mile. Even though it was late, most of the way was on well-lit main streets, which was the route she took every day, so she wasn't too worried. After leaving work, Jennifer called 2 friends who were also finishing evening shifts nearby. They agreed to meet outside a 24-hour convenience store about halfway between her job and her house. The 3 of them sat together for about an hour, talking and sharing stories from their day. At around 1:30 a.m., Jennifer said goodbye and headed home. She had about an 18-minute walk left. The next evening, her mother began to worry. She had not heard from her since the night before. Jennifer's room was in the basement, so when she came home late, her family often didn't see her. In the mornings, she typically left early to catch the school bus before her mother and brothers woke up. When Jennifer didn't return from school and didn't answer calls, concern turned to fear. She always told her mother where she was going, but that day there was no message. Her mother found out that she had missed school and then missed her shift at the restaurant. Panic set in. She called all of Jennifer's friends. No one had seen her since the night before. Her father also hadn't heard from her. With no leads, her parents reported her missing. Although Jennifer was 18, police acted quickly and began a search. Officers interviewed friends and classmates, while family and neighbors canvassed the area. Some searched the streets, others printed and posted flyers with Jennifer's photo and details. Investigators first concluded it was unlikely Jennifer had run away. Family and friends described her as extremely responsible and never one to disappear without telling someone. Detectives then reconstructed her movements. Jennifer's friends confirmed that they parted ways with her at around 1:30 a.m., with her heading home while they headed the other way. Soon, investigators learned something new. Jennifer hadn't left work alone. A co-worker named Mark had walked with her part of the way before she split off to meet her friends at the convenience store. Detectives visited Mark and immediately noticed fresh scratches on his face. Suspicious at first glance, he claimed they were shaving cuts and showed them his razor, which proved nothing. Investigators began to suspect he might be involved in Jennifer's disappearance and that the scratches could be from her fighting back. However, there was no evidence linking him to a crime. They asked Mark to take a polygraph. He agreed, and the results showed no deception. That lowered suspicion. Detectives also investigated Jennifer's ex-boyfriend. He said they remained on good terms, hadn't spoken that night, and that he'd been home. He, too, passed a polygraph, and investigators ruled him out. Attention then shifted to Boris, a 21-year-old local whom Jennifer knew. Friends had seen him drive past while they sat outside the store that night. Further checks revealed Boris had a troubling history: erratic behavior, prior stalking accusations, and a restraining order. Friends added that he had recently asked Jennifer out, and she declined. Detectives interviewed Boris. He denied involvement, but appeared nervous and struggled with some questions. He consented to a search of his car. One window was shattered. Investigators considered whether it broke during an abduction, but Boris said it happened earlier. He also took a polygraph and showed no signs of deception. Despite his behavior and past, there was no solid evidence tying him to Jennifer's disappearance. Meanwhile, police, family, and friends searched the city but found no trace of Jennifer or her belongings. A new theory spread in Ottawa. A serial offender could be responsible. 2 years earlier, Ardith Wood had disappeared elsewhere in the city and was later found dead in a river. With no arrest in that case, people feared the same predator might be involved. With few leads, investigators intensified efforts. They established a command center in a church near the store where Jennifer was last seen. Hundreds of locals joined the search, dividing into teams to comb different areas. Police used search dogs, helicopters with heat sensors, and conducted door-to-door checks along Jennifer's route home. Soon, a potential lead emerged. A woman on the edge of Jennifer's neighborhood reported hearing a piercing scream around 1:30 a.m. She looked toward the main road but saw nothing and didn't call police at the time. Given the timing and location, detectives now believe the scream may have been Jennifer's, possibly the moment of her abduction. Another neighbor also reported hearing a scream that night but saw nothing helpful. A week passed with no sign of Jennifer and no solid leads. Hopes of finding her alive began to fade. Detectives reclassified the case as a possible homicide, unlocking additional resources. They held a press conference asking the public for information, and Jennifer's parents pleaded with the presumed captor to release her. Still, the search turned up nothing. Investigators tried a new approach. Jennifer's neighborhood was made up of private homes with yards, each requiring a warrant to search, and no judge would approve warrants for hundreds of properties, so detectives went door to door asking for voluntary consent. Most residents agreed, and officers searched hundreds of homes and yards, but found nothing. This continued for several days until everything changed. On September 18, about a week and a half after Jennifer disappeared, a police officer took his family to a park on the edge of town. As he walked along the trail, he smelled a familiar odor of decomposition, so he followed it into the woods. A few dozen feet from the trail, he discovered a human body, partially covered with branches and leaves. He immediately called it in because the body was so badly decomposed that it could not be identified by the naked eye. It was turned over to the medical examiner. All of the clothing was missing. Suspecting the body might be Jennifer's, the lead detective made a strategic decision. He set up a police tent by the parking lot at the trailhead to mislead the press about the true location. The reasoning was straightforward. Only the killer would know the actual spot where the body was hidden. Soon after, medical examiners confirmed the remains were Jennifer's. However, due to advanced decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. The sample was sent to a lab in Toronto for further analysis, but the results remained unchanged. One thing is certain: this was no accident. This was a murder. Police again appealed to the public, releasing dozens of surveillance images from the convenience store where Jennifer had been with friends the night she disappeared. Detectives suspected her abductor might have seen her there, waited, and followed her home. They worked to identify everyone in the footage, but a few men remained unidentified. Around the same time, another lead emerged. After news of the body spread, a witness said he had been walking through the same park in the early morning hours of September 8. He clearly remembered seeing a man standing near the trail entrance and described him in enough detail for police to draw a sketch. Detectives believed this man was likely the killer and hoped someone would recognize him, but the sketch was vague and could resemble many people. It generated another wave of tips, all of which led nowhere. Things got even more complicated when two different men confessed to Jennifer's murder. A closer look revealed that both were liars and that they had no reason to commit the crime. They were just looking for attention. From then on, the case was almost dead. The clues were thin, and the police still lacked the evidence to get any closer to solving the case. Later, investigators learned that the murder of Ardith Wood, killed 2 years earlier, had been solved. The suspect was a local man, and detectives checked whether he might also be responsible for Jennifer's death. It was quickly confirmed he was not in the city when Jennifer was abducted. Ruling out any connection, by early 2006, detectives made additional public appeals, but nothing panned out. Then, on June 9, an unexpected call came in from a local hospital. Staff reported that a man had run into the street completely naked, shouting that he had killed Jennifer Teague. Police rushed to interview him, and he confessed. There was a major issue. Toxicology showed he had taken 5 times the typical dose of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Once sober, he claimed no memory of the confession and denied involvement. He said he knew about the case only from the news, and that on the night Jennifer vanished, he was at a friend's house playing video games. However, when detectives went to speak with the friend, they learned he had recently suffered a serious accident that left him with partial memory loss. Detectives couldn't ignore the mounting concerns and decided to investigate further. Kevin Davis, 24 years old, had no criminal record and worked at a local pizzeria. What stood out was his location. He lived across the street from the woman who reported hearing a scream, and only a short distance from the church, where police had set up their command center. As they reviewed the case, detectives realized they had already spoken to Kevin in the first days after Jennifer disappeared. Because he lived nearby, officers had knocked on his door as part of their routine canvassing. At that time, Kevin said he'd been home all night, a claim his mother, sleeping in the next room, supported. Nearly a year later, however, he changed his story, saying he'd actually been at a friend's house playing video games. That wasn't the only concern. Detectives also found an early tip, submitted right after Jennifer's body was discovered, suggesting they look at Kevin because he resembled the composite sketch. Investigators had initially dismissed it amid hundreds of unverified leads. Now, with his confession and alibi constantly changing, Kevin becomes even more suspicious. However, there is one major obstacle. There is no hard evidence. No DNA. No fingerprints, nothing directly linking him to the murder, and Kevin had withdrawn his confession. With the case stalled, detectives wondered how they could ever hold him accountable. For weeks, they re-examined files, explored new angles, and searched for anything they might have missed. Nothing clicked. They began to fear Kevin would never be arrested. Then, unexpectedly, everything changed. On June 26, just weeks after being released from the hospital, Kevin approached a neighbor and asked for help. When the neighbor asked what was wrong, Kevin told him to call the police because he had killed Jennifer Teague. He then went to a nearby store, saw a police officer, and calmly repeated the same admission. Police brought him to the station. This time, detectives were meticulous to prevent any retraction. They read him his rights and had medical staff test his blood for banned substance and alcohol. The tests came back clean. Only then did they start recording his confession. Kevin said he had harbored a deep resentment toward women for most of his life because he felt unloved. In the days before the murder, he began taking his mother's car at night, carrying a knife, rope, and a gag. He admitted he was hunting for a victim who met two criteria: young and defenseless. His plan was to kidnap someone, take her home, and abuse her. He said he finally decided to act after two personal setbacks: losing his job and the death of a beloved pet. On the night Jennifer disappeared, Kevin parked near the convenience store and noticed three girls outside, laughing and talking. He stayed out of the camera's view and waited for them to separate. Around 1:30 a.m., Jennifer said goodbye to her friends and walked toward her neighborhood. Despite generally good lighting, parts of the street were dark. Kevin attacked her in one of those shadowed areas, forced her into his car at knife point, and drove her to his house. His mother was asleep in the next room, so he kept quiet. He threatened Jennifer with a knife, led her into the bedroom, and attempted to abuse her, but failed. Enraged, he strangled her to death. His mother, asleep on the other side of the wall, heard nothing. After Kevin confessed, detectives asked him to show where he had left Jennifer's body. He led them directly to the real site, not the decoy location with the press tent, but the actual spot known only to investigators. That alone proved his confession was genuine. He then explained why he decided to confess, and his reasons stunned the detectives. A few weeks earlier, when officers visited his home, Kevin panicked and became convinced he was about to be arrested. His paranoia escalated. He believed police were watching him constantly. At work, he even made a co-worker lift his shirt to check for a wire. Consumed by fear, Kevin decided the only way to end it was to admit what he had done. He had no idea the detectives actually had no evidence. If he had stayed silent, he might have avoided prosecution. Instead, Kevin was charged with murder and jailed to await trial. From jail, he tried to retract his confession, but it was too late. The trial began in January 2008, and Kevin pled guilty again. Because of that plea, the case moved quickly. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In his final statement, Kevin said he regretted his actions and would give his life if it could bring Jennifer back. Jennifer's father, who was in court, later said he didn't believe him. To Jennifer's father, Kevin's words sounded like an attempt to reduce his sentence rather than true remorse. Kevin went to prison with no guarantee he will be released after 25 years. One last note. In 2015, Jennifer's father published a book about the case and how the family endured the unimaginable. He wrote that his goal was to help others who have lost loved ones, showing that even in the darkest times, it is possible to find a way through the pain.